All right, welcome everyone. It's great to have you all here tonight. Thanks for joining me on tonight's session. This is I'm going to be talking about Lightroom and the most recent updates, last two versions, 14.4 and 14.5. And also, so talk you through some of those, I think, updates that are worth knowing about. And then also walk you through an image, just sort of how I went about editing it using some of the more recent additions to Lightroom. Okay, so as I mentioned, 14.4 Lightroom Classic was released maybe a few months ago, maybe less, 6-8 weeks ago, and then 14.5 was released, I want to say a couple of weeks ago. And you'll know what version of Lightroom you're in because you can just come up here to the, Lightroom Classic menu. Just click on About Lightroom Classic. It'll be in the File menu if you're on a Windows machine. And you can see here we're in 14.5 release. And of course, you need the subscription to get all of the latest updates. All right, so the first, I think, fairly significant improvement is improvement to the Generative AI removal tool. And so let's just go into an image here. To access the Generative AI removal tool, right, you can just press Q, and that activates the removal tool in general. And then up here in the remove area, you have three different modes of this for this tool. You have the clone, the heal, and then the Generative AI, and you have to check this box here. So this is actually just called remove. But if you want to use the AI, and you probably want to, then you check this box here, this Generative AI. That'll use artificial intelligence to essentially make a really good guess about what you're removing and what it should fill in so that it looks natural and realistic. This other box here, detect objects, that may be useful in some cases. I normally leave this off. That just means that if you encircle something with the tool, it'll detect what's inside. I just like to paint over it. So here's an example where this should have been okay before, and it should have been able to remove it. Now the improvements are that it's much better at removing things and filling in with things, with content that looks very natural and realistic. Here's a classical example. You've got a photographer in your image. So I'm just going to encircle him in just paint over what you want to remove like this. And you get this red overlay. It doesn't matter if you go over, you don't want to go over too much, but you also want to give some context for the AI to know how to remove that and fill it in. And then you come over here to the right side. And once you add that, then you have to click on the remove button here. And that will create that'll start the AI process. And you can see it did a great job here. You can see the shadow line here of the mountain behind it extends the way it should. The mountain line, everything looks even here, and everything looks quite good. Now we've got this shadow down below that we also need to remove. So I'm going to do that in another, by applying it again like that. And then again, I'm going to come over here and click on remove. All right, and that did a pretty good job. You'll notice that if you look carefully, you've got some little things growing here in the reflections, and maybe there's one there that you don't want. Well, that's where you have the variations button over here. So you have 3 variations per application of the remove tool. And it doesn't mean that you're stuck with 3. You can always remove the application of the tool and then start over again. But within each time you use it, you have 3 variations. And so let's say we want to try a different variation. I just click the right arrow button here. That's variation number 2, and that's variation number 3. And so I think probably variation number 2 maybe looks a little better because we don't have these grasses there reflecting from above. I don't see them above, so why have them below? If you wanted to start over again, you simply just hover your hand, the mouse, it turns into a hand, over this remove area and just press the delete key on your keyboard, and you can start over again. Now you notice there's another photographer over here, and you can barely see him, but you can see his camera. And so let's do this because this is a little bit more difficult. And I see the tripod leg all the way down here. All right, so something like that. If you want to add to this, you can just keep brushing in like that. And the size here is just the size of your application, your tool, and I can use the left and right bracket keys as well to make it bigger or smaller. Click on remove. All right, and that did a really good job. And I can go through some of the variations here again. Click on either arrow. There's one more there, and there's another one. I actually think that I like this third one because there was this branch, I think, in front of the photographer, and this rock back here doesn't actually go all the way off the screen there. It's a smaller rock. So this one looks the most realistic to me. And you can see that does a fantastic job. Let's go to another example that's a little bit more difficult. This is one where I struggled before this update, and now it's a lot better. So here's an urban scene, New York City, and I couldn't quite move myself to get in a position to not have this light here, this light in the frame. I really didn't want the light there. So I'm going to, again, press Q. And I'm going to make the brush a little bigger now by pressing the right bracket key. And again, I'm just going to enclose it like so. And then you'll notice that this light extends down the right side. So there's the top of the light post, as it were, over here. And there's even a little cable that drops down this way. All right, so let's try that. Click on remove. All right, so that's the first variation. I'm going to click on variations to see the second one. And here's the third one. So, I think this third one, but I kind of forget what was behind. So I'm going to hover my hand and select it and then press delete. And I just want to take a look at this building back here. Okay, so this building, you see it's just a pretty square rectangular building back here, and there's some windows back here. So let's do it again. Let's see, now that I remember what's behind there, so I can be a little more have a better idea of which variation I want. Let's do it again. Again, click on remove. Okay, so that's pretty good. Remember, we checked it before I removed it, and it's just a simple rectangular building. Here's variation 2. Actually add some of the windows over here. And variation 3, similar as well. So almost any of these will work. If, it's down in the corner here, the goal here is just to get rid of that distracting light and pole, I think. So that does a really nice job, I think. One more example, which is this one here. This is a job I was doing for a commercial job, and they wanted this image, but we couldn't quite get this scaffolding here removed. Here's another one that's really difficult. I'm going to press Q. And once again, just going to rough the mask around, or just make a selection that's fairly rough around here. And I want you to notice also that behind the scaffolding, there's this plumbing or this white piping, and the white PCV pipe or whatever it is comes down over here, goes across, and then connects to this radiator, I suppose. And this is brick back here. So remember that if we have to choose variations to see what the AI is actually generating, because this is, again, generative, right? So it's generating new content based on what it thinks will fit in. So I'm going to click on remove. Okay, and notice now, I had mentioned before that this piping came across, and here we don't see it coming across. So let's try one of the variations. Number 2, and there's number 3. And you'll see in number 3 now that it actually recreated it properly, or at least the closest to what we had originally. All right, and that's a fairly intricate remove because remember now, it has to fill in the windows in the back. It has to fill in this brick wall. It has to fill in this piping down here and the floor. I think that this is much better than it was in the previous version. It's in the past, I would have had to use it a couple of times and gone through lots of variations. It's much better now at I don't want to say guessing, at generating content that really fits what was in the background. All right, so that's one of the improvements. I suspect, if not, I'm sure that this is going to get better and better and better, and that'll raise all kinds of questions, I suppose, as to how far you want to take this, because it'll be good enough where you can pretty much remove anything from an image. And that's going to, I think, require us, it's required me to think about what are the implications? Is that what I really want to do in my images? I think for the examples that I've shown you here, they were more practical type things, pragmatic, taking a person out of the image that you really couldn't get out of the picture when you made it, or here, a commercial picture where they don't want the scaffolding. But you can imagine you take a landscape and there's three too many trees, and you don't want those trees, you just remove them, and that gets a little questionable in terms of what really is truthful, etc. So we'll have to deal with that as we continue to use these more and more powerful tools. Okay, the next upgrade that they made, or update, is what they call GPU-powered preview generation. And all that really is I'm sure that you've probably experienced a situation where, let's say I go into one of my older photos, one of my older folders here. And if I'm scrolling through this folder, maybe not this one, let's see one here where you don't have the previews. Okay, here we go. So you get to a part of your catalog where you get these gray boxes, and that's Lightroom has to fill them in. It has to generate a preview, perhaps because you haven't been in this folder for a while, or this collection for a while. And you notice that on my computer here, it's pretty fast. So if I scroll down here, there's a lot of gray there, and within a couple of seconds, it fills it in. That's what's been improved. In the past, that would take a little bit longer. I think this is on by default, but if you want to check that, you go up into your Lightroom preferences, found in the Lightroom Classic menu. And in preferences, in the first tab in general, I'm sorry, mistake, in the performance tab, you will see there's a new entry now below use graphics processor, auto, that means use the whatever video card or graphics processor your computer has. There's one called use GPU, graphics processing unit, for preview generation. And this, again, will probably be on auto, but now you have an option there, and that'll speed up the previews, which again, I think just speeds up performance overall in Lightroom, particularly with larger catalogs, with images you haven't looked at in a while. I have a quick question. Is Lightroom as good as the removal tool in Photoshop? I would say the removal tool, it is as good as the one in Photoshop. Photoshop has some other features that Lightroom doesn't have. So for example, in Photoshop, you can actually just add things from a prompt. So you can say, for example, if I open up this image here, you could actually, in Photoshop, you could type in, add another boat in the foreground, add two more boats in the foreground, and it will add them in. Lightroom doesn't give you that capability. I think the idea is that most folks that are using Lightroom are not necessarily wanting to add images, compositing as an example. They just want to be able to remove things and enhance their raw files, whereas Photoshop, pretty much anything goes, you can composite, etc. But the actual removal tool itself, I think it's the same. Lightroom also, Photoshop also has generative expand, where you can crop outwards. Again, they're thinking about Photoshop as a much more graphic design, compositing tool, whereas Lightroom, again, dedicated to photographers who are shooting raw images. Another quick question, what part of your workflow should you use the remove tool? Well, it doesn't matter when you use it in terms of the quality of the image. So you can use it at the beginning or at the end. But in terms of the workflow, I think earlier than later, right? Because if there's something in your image that you want to remove, like that person or the photographer in my image, let's get that out so that you can then work on your image and have a clearer vision of what you want it to look like. So I would say that remove tool, AI remove, just like removing spots or spots or sensor dust or things like that, do that early on so that now you can work on a nice, clean, pristine image without any distractions, etc. Okay, so the next update is what they call custom subsets in copy-paste settings. And let me show you what that means. So here are two images, all right? These two images here, they're fairly the same, you know, shot within a couple of seconds of each other. And let's say that I am working on this image and I press R and I want to do a crop. And let's say I'm going to crop to a square format. So I'm just going to select, or it could be any crop. It doesn't really have to be square. So let's say I do something like this. All right, and there's my crop. Let's say now I want to apply that crop to this image. Well, there's two ways to do that. One way is to select your source image, then hold down the Shift key and select your the image that you want to apply the settings to. And then you come down here and you click on Sync Settings in the bottom right. And now you can choose or select what settings you want to synchronize from the first image to the second image. And in this case, you can see that I have crop already selected, probably because I was demoing this before. But typically you could say check all in case you want to synchronize everything, right, from one image to the other. Or if it's just one or two things, you would have to click on check none, and then you have to come over and select what you do want to synchronize. And if I click on synchronize, then now this image gets the same crop, okay? So if I crop this one by 50%, this one will get cropped by 50%. But you notice that there's a new option here called subset. And subset means that you can save a subset of these settings as a preset, okay? So what does that mean? That means that, let's say that I only want to synchronize crop, and maybe I'm going to use that in the future. Like maybe there's other instances where I want to crop an image and then apply that, just the crop, to 2 or 3 other images because they're more or less the same, right? You have a series of images. Well, instead of having to go through this process and selecting all that, you can just come down here and you could say, well, I already have this saved as crop. So let's delete this. All right. So we don't have any presets as if you were doing this for the first time. I have crop selected. Now I can come over here and I can say save. And if I click on save, I can save this particular subset of my settings, basically just crop. I can save that as a preset. All right. So what does this look like in practice? Let's say I come to this image and I crop it even more. Then I can again select this one, click on synchronize settings, and again, it'll remember what you had last. But let's say this is all checked. You can just come down here and select crop, and it'll just select those settings to synchronize over. Now this is only crop. Let's say I only wanted to synchronize the basic settings, not crop, but just everything in the basic settings. Well, I have a preset for that already that I created. And if I select basic, now you'll see that only the basic settings will be synchronized over. This is really useful if you don't want to change crop, if you don't want to adjust the crop in other images, but perhaps you want to save over the basic settings. Or this could be you want to save over the color settings or the, whatever. Maybe it's just the temperature, whatever it is. Now, the reason why they call it copy and paste is because I mentioned there were 2 ways to do this. One way is to select the first image, select the second one, and click on synchronize. Another way is to right-click or control-click your source image and go down to develop settings and select copy settings. And when you do this, you're going to get the same window again. And once again, I can select my subset if you have something saved, maybe 3 or 4 of these, right? Like I can imagine saving crop. I can imagine saving the basic settings. I can imagine saving color grading if I like to apply particular color grading to black and white images, like a tinting, maybe a sepia tone or what have you. I can copy and paste those over. So this is copy. And then I would right click again on the image you want to paste the settings to. And I would click on develop settings, paste settings. And for example, let's say I did it on this image here. So I copied the crop settings from this image and I want to paste them onto this image, just the crop settings, right click, and I would select develop settings and then paste settings. And now you see that it got cropped, and it got cropped exactly the way this image is cropped. All right. So that's just using crop, but this could be any of those settings that you save. All right. So that's the subsets now in synchronizing 2 or more images. For example, it just doesn't have to be just one image. You can select this one and then select a bunch of other images, and whatever you synchronize here will go from this image to these other 4 images. So your source image is always going to be the one that's a little bit lighter in color. Like you can see, this is a lighter gray, and the destination image is the ones that are going to be synchronized to the source image are a little darker gray. So let's say you've got 20 portraits and you want to sync settings from the first image to the other 19. This is an easy way to do that. And you don't, again, as I showed you don't have to do all the settings. You can just do a subset of those. Okay, the next enhancement or upgrade is the detail panel. So this is a pretty significant one if you haven't seen this already. Okay, so let me show you how this works. Here's an image here, which is fairly noisy, ISO 400. And so potentially I would want to use the denoise in Lightroom. So in Lightroom, we have the manual noise reduction, but we've had this denoise up here. You don't see it now, but there used to be a denoise button that you would click on, or another way of getting that would be to right click on the image and select enhance. And then you could apply AI denoise, and it would do a really fantastic job of denoising the image. The only issue, or the little caveat to that, was that it would actually create a second DNG file. So when you use the previous denoise, you would get a second DNG file that had the denoise applied, and you would now have 2 files, one without the AI denoise, one with. They'd still be raw files, but then you would have this issue of, do I delete the original one and keep my denoise the raw file because it's still a raw? And that created some confusion. It also created more files on your hard drive. Well, that now has been removed, and it has made this process completely non-destructive. So what that means is that right over here, I just have a checkbox now. I can apply denoise, or I can apply raw details. Raw details is basically an algorithm that extracts a little bit more detail out of your raw file. Or I can apply super resolution. Super resolution was also a feature that you would have to have used the enhance feature, and that would again create another raw file. Now it's all just checkboxes. So if I click on denoise, it'll take a little while to generate and apply the denoise, and it doesn't create another raw file. So that's nice. And you can see it takes a lot of the noise away. So, and the thing is, if you want to see what the original noise looked like, I can uncheck this box, and there's all the noise. You can see it. Maybe you can see more over here. All right, you can see that noise here. And if I recheck this box, it's pretty good. I mean, that's a very good denoise algorithm. You also have a slider here that you can adjust if you want to apply a little bit less denoise, a little bit more, but halfway, 50 in most cases does a really good job. You'll notice that when you apply denoise, raw details is automatically turned on, and that's actually a good thing because, theoretically, when you use noise reduction, you soften the image somewhat. The raw details brings that sharpening back, and so you wind up with a really nice noise reduced image without losing any sharpness. Now, there's one little caveat to this tool, which is the same as it was before, is that you cannot apply denoise and super resolution at the same time. Super resolution is another algorithm that essentially doubles the size of your image. So, and it doubles it in width and height. So that means you wind up with, if your original image is 20 megapixels, it'll be 80 megapixels. And the way you do that is you just click on super resolution here. Once again, it goes through the algorithm, and if I bring up my information here, I'm now at 8762 by 6571, so that's double width and height. Okay, and this is useful if you want a much larger file for printing, if you want to print large, or maybe you've cropped in a lot on an image and then you want to print that cropped portion of the image. You can turn on super resolution, and it does a wonderful job of interpolating, making the image larger to give you much better quality for printing. But when I use the super resolution, I cannot use the denoise. Okay, so that's the trade-off. If you don't need the super resolution, I can always uncheck this and notice that my resolution goes back to the original camera size, 4381 by 3286, and I can turn on denoise. So one or the other. My suggestion is, if you are not printing large and you're not cropping in really tightly, then, and you have a noisy image, then use the denoise, because that'll give you better quality overall. If you have an image that isn't noisy and you need the larger size, then you can use super resolution. I don't think I use super resolution all that much, except when, again, I'm printing large. My cameras are generally in the 25 to 50 megapixel range. So if I'm going really large, 30 by 40, then I might turn on super resolution. Question by Marsha. Do you think that denoise is just as good as another noise reduction program like Topaz? Which program do you normally use? So there's two answers to your question. Do I think it's as good as Topaz? I think it's as good, yes. And it's getting better because this is AI driven. And so as the AI algorithm improves, it reads the noise and it reads what's in your image and applies the noise reduction intelligently, as it were. But there's the second important reason why I like using denoise, is because you keep your image in the raw format. Once you use Topaz or any other Photoshop plugin, you are converting your image from a RAW file to a pixel-based file, whether that is Photoshop or a TIFF file. And once you convert to a TIFF file, you have a little bit less flexibility with that file. Whereas if you keep it in the RAW format, notice that I can turn off the denoise whenever I like. I can turn on the super resolution. It's always raw. It's always non-destructive. Once you go to a Photoshop file, by using one of these plugins, you are no longer in the non-destructive region. One other thing I will mention is that every time Lightroom, every time they release an update and they improve the noise reduction feature, it gets better. That means that, let's say 6 months from now, when they release version 14.9 or 15 and the noise reduction feature is improved, just by clicking this box, I'll get better noise reduction. Once you commit to Topaz, that's it. You would have to apply the noise reduction to your original RAW file again, et cetera, et cetera. So I just like the convenience, the efficiency of keeping everything in Lightroom. My workflow is simpler. I'm not creating additional files, et cetera. And as I said, I think the quality is pretty damn good. If you look here, right, you really can't see any noise, and I'm at 200%. So if I back out to 100%, right, there is no noise whatsoever. And I've tried this on very, very noisy images, 800, 1200 ISO on a 10-year-old camera. So I know that for today's cameras, ISO, 800 is nothing, but on a very, on a 10-year-old, 12-year-old camera, it really makes the image usable again. So I'm actually going back. This is another interesting thing about RAW files. I've actually gone back to old images that I made many years ago that were ISO 1200 and really were not usable at the time. And I'm finding that I actually can use them now and process them, and they're usable, they're workable. I can print them, and I don't have this excess noise. Okay, just a few more things here. So another thing is auto write XMP optimization. So basically what that is if you all of the adjustments that you make in Lightroom are saved in your catalog. All the adjustments that you make to your images are saved in the catalog. If you, for whatever reason, lose your catalog, it gets corrupt, that would be the typical reason, or your hard drive crashed and your catalog was on there. Assuming that you had access to your images, you would still be able to import your images back into Lightroom, but with a new catalog, you would lose all of your adjustments, right? The adjustments are in the catalog. So there's two ways to mitigate that. Well, three ways really. One way is to make sure you have lots of backups of your catalog. A second way to mitigate that is by converting to DNG. So when you convert your images to DNG, whether you do that on import or afterwards, The DNG file format, which is a raw format, has the advantage of saving your edits into the file itself, which means that if your catalog got corrupt, you could re-import your DNG files and it would save all of your edits. So you wouldn't have to re-edit all your images. So that's the second way to do that, to mitigate that issue. The third way is to have Lightroom write XMP files. XMP files are small files that are written next to each one of your raw files that contain the information of the edits that you made. And the way you turn that on is, this is a per catalog setting, not in the Lightroom preferences. So you come to your catalog settings, and in your catalog settings, you'll see here that in the metadata tab, there's an option here called automatically write changes into XMP. And I have this off because I don't really like that. I don't want all these extra files, and I back up my catalog many times. And so I'm not too worried about losing my catalog. But some folks have this turned on, and this, another reason why a lot of people didn't turn it on before is because it potentially could slow Lightroom down, because every time you made an edit, it would have to write it into the catalog and write it out to this XMP file for that image. Well, now they've made this process simpler in the sense that it'll wait until you're done editing and then write those changes out. If I were to check this box now, it would create XMP files for every image in my catalog. Okay, so you would have this going forward into the future, but it would also add XMP files for every image in the past. And so you would have all these XMP files in there, next to your raw files. So this is just, if you use XMP files, if there's something that you have turned on, this will improve the performance. If you don't use this as of now, then I would say maybe you don't really need to use it if you're not using it already. Just either, what I recommend is just make sure you have multiple copies of your catalog. So whenever you quit Lightroom, you can have it ask you to make a copy of your catalog, and then save that in a safe place, store it online or put it onto another hard drive, and do this regularly. I do this at least every week, so that if anything would happen to my catalog, I'm only going to lose a couple of days worth of work, not weeks or longer than that. Two more improvements. One is they've improved the ability for Lightroom to detect duplicates. So for example, if you import images from your camera card, and then you rename those images in Lightroom, and then for whatever reason you use the same camera card again to import images, maybe you added images to that camera card but didn't format it, before Lightroom would get confused because you renamed the images that you had imported, it would import those images again and you would have duplicates. Now Lightroom is a little smarter. It will detect the duplicate images even if you rename them in your catalog. Okay, so once you import an image into Lightroom, it will never import it again from the camera card, even if you're using the same camera card and haven't erased the images from that card. I know a lot of folks don't format, they just keep shooting with the same card. And when you go to import images again, you don't want it to import the images you already imported. And this protects against that a little bit more. Okay, and then one last feature that they added, which is that they improved the filtering a little bit to include a few extra ways to filter your images. So if I'm in my, let's go to photographs here, and the way to use the filter bar is you press the / key. And when you press in fact, it was showing, press the / key again, and you see that you get this library filter here at the top. All right, so / key hides it. That's the key above your return key. You press the / key again, it shows the library filter. And the library filter allows you to filter by many different criteria. So for example, if I wanted to filter by metadata, I click on metadata, the word metadata here, and you see that we get 4 columns. And each one of these columns can have a different filter. So you can start with the first column as your first filter, and then you can continue to refine or create subsets of your filtering. So for example, here, I can just click here and you see that I can filter by date. Okay, and so these are all the dates that all the images are here. Okay, or I can go 2005 or whatever, 2007, lots of people in here, 2009, okay? Or if I click over here in the date, there's many other types of ways you can filter, but the one that they added was if you go down here to develop, okay, this develop submenu was a lot smaller. And now they've added things like, for example, has masking, has AI mask, has lens blur, has AI remove. So you can actually filter your catalog by images that you've added AI remove tool. You've used the AI remove tool, or has denoise, for example, has raw details, has super resolution. So let's say I wanted to find all the images in my catalog that I've used super resolution on. I would select this, and here they are. These are all the images with super resolution. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. When you select has super resolution, you get a yes or a no. Okay, I'm sorry. So right here, you see yes, 3, and no, 57,000. So if I click on yes, right, these are the 3 images that I've used super resolution on, okay? And then after this, you can see that it gives me more capabilities to filter even more. And so right now I have it by camera. So of the images, of the 3 images that I've used super resolution on, each were taken by different cameras. I can change this to be, the date or the day or even the file type, whatever. And you can continue to refine your filtering until you get what you want. But the key thing here is that now you can filter by very specific kinds of metadata, like, what you've done to your images. For example, if you come here to develop, one of them that's very cool that a lot of folks aren't aware of is if you come down here to the bottom, there's one called treatment. And treatment is the word, unfortunately, it's the word that Lightroom uses to tell you whether it's been converted to color, to black and white. So if I select treatment, then you'll see up here, my yes and no changes to black and white or color. And so this will show me all my color images, and this will show me all my black and white images. So that's an easy way to filter down to just the black and white images. Now the treatment black and white image option has been there. I just wanted to show you that one, but the one that they added has these different things: AI remove, noise removal, etc. So a couple of questions very quickly from Greg. It may be off topic, but you mentioned updating 10-year-old images. What is your image storage philosophy? Do you store them in a RAID, on premises, or online? So that's a very good question. I wish I had every image I've ever made. I've lost some over the years and some disappeared, but I have mostly everything. I keep almost everything online. By online, I mean that I have access to it in this catalog. There's some other images that I don't keep in here that are very, very old. But at the moment, the system that I have is I have them on a NAS. So a NAS is a network attached storage. So it's a RAID. It's about 16 terabytes, and that's attached to my network. Lightroom allows you to keep raw files on a NAS. What you cannot keep on the NAS is your catalog. And you wouldn't want it to be on your NAS anyway, because you want your catalog to be on a fairly fast hard drive. So my Lightroom catalog is internal on my SSD, which is going to be very fast, and I back that up. And then I keep all of my images on the NAS, and then that gets backed up to another drive fairly, not that often, but maybe once a month or something like that, because the RAID gives me some level of protection. And then I back that up to the cloud as well. I'm using Backblaze for my cloud storage, and that backs up whenever it sees a change. And so this gives me images in 3 places. That's the general rule. You want to have them in 3 different places, and one of those places should be off-site or in the cloud or what have you. And I think Backblaze, I want to say it's something like $6 a month for unlimited storage for a computer. So I think it's a pretty good deal. Jerry, is there a way to apply a luminosity range selection within a localized selection within an image? There is not. So at the moment, you can only apply luminosity range to the whole image, but you can modify that mask. So I'm going to show you an image that I'm going to work through an image very quickly, and I will remember to use this luminosity and show you how you can kind of modify that. And on the update, I tried it and it was very slow. Even with updated video cards, has issue been resolved? I can't tell you whether why it's slow in your system. I'm on a Mac Mini M4 Pro, which is a fairly fast computer, fairly new. It depends on what computer you have, your GPU, etc. So it's hard to say. But for me, it's been fast from the beginning. Like, I haven't really noticed any slowdowns. But I will tell you that if your computer is a couple of years old, well, a couple of years, right? Like, that's not too long. But if it's I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, it's going to start to get a little. It's going to struggle a little bit with some of these more advanced AI tools. But even a 5-year-old computer should work. I know someone who had I want to say like a 6-year-old computer, and it would take 4 or 5 minutes to do the noise reduction. That's a long time. But on mine, you saw that it took about 20 or 30 seconds. So it's hard to say. I don't think it's a bug with Lightroom. Make sure that you that you got everything optimized. Optimize your catalog. So there's a way to come up here and where is it? I forget now. I believe is if you go into catalog settings, you can, or maybe it's when you back up. So right here, if you say back up once a week when exiting Lightroom, when you quit and ask you to back up, it will also ask you if you want to optimize your catalog. Definitely do the optimize, because that will help to speed things up. Okay, so let me jump into an image here before we wrap up for tonight. So a lot of you guys know me for landscapes, but I also love cityscapes. I live in New York. And so this was during the recent Build Expo, B&H Build Expo. I was in the city for a couple of days doing some presentations and walking around the city. It was very foggy and overcast, and the fog was very low. And I just loved this atmosphere that the fog created with these beautiful and very modern looking buildings. And I had my iPhone because I didn't have enough room and storage capacity to keep my camera with me. But I used my iPhone 15 Pro for this. I use an app called Pro Camera. I just use it for convenience because it's set up to capture in RAW, in manual. So when I open up that app, I'm ready to get the most out of my camera. Whereas when I open up the built-in camera app, typically I'm using that for candids and street shots and family and taking pictures of, of food items and things like that. So I have that set to JPEG. So this allows me to just quickly get into a more serious shooting mode with using a dedicated app. I could use the Lightroom app for this as well. I like Pro Camera a little better in terms of the interface. That saves a DNG file, and that DNG file I then import into Lightroom on my phone, and that immediately syncs it to the cloud, and then it syncs it to my desktop. So this is an interesting image in that I was trying to just capture sort of this ephemeral nature of the fog and these buildings, and I wanted it to be sort of airy and sort of modern, and at the same time sort of mysterious. And so often I'm not sure if I want to convert to black and white, but this image, I already had an inkling that I wanted it to be as abstract as possible. So when I went into the develop module here, I immediately tried the black and white conversion just to try a different profile here. And I'm going to use the Apple ProRAW monochrome because that's the one that really gives you the best black and white conversion with the iPhone. The other profiles don't work quite as good. Apple has a dedicated ProRAW monochrome profile. You also saw here that they have a dedicated color profile called Apple ProRAW. So I converted to monochrome, and already I knew that this was going more in the direction that I wanted to go in. So I think it was a little dark when I raised the exposure a little bit. Something like that. I want it to be brighter, more open. And I want to really work with the tonality so that the image feels like it's growing from these darks down here in the bottom up into what looks like the top of the building, and then it just kind of disappears. So that's my exposure there. Let me check my whites. So I'm going to bring the whites up, hold on the Option key, and you can see that I'm already clipping here. And so I'm going to bring that down. Right, I'm on there. Then I'm going to adjust my blacks, and I want these blacks to be nice and strong, maybe around there. Back off a little bit. Okay, so I'm fine there for now. When I adjust my whites and my blacks, a lot of the things in the basic panel, I'm, going for a kind of a ballpark rough estimate of what I want the image to look like. I may not, I can always come back and readjust these, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, get it looking more like what I'm thinking about, right? So there's the before and there's the after. Okay, so again, you can already see a little more abstract, a little more luminous, tones working a little bit better, and so far so good. Let's add some more contrast. All right, I'm going to go pretty aggressive with this. I really want to make this richer in terms of light to dark. Sometimes here I will go down and use the tone curve, but in this case, just basic contrast is fine for now. Open up the shadows. Okay, so again, I'm really trying to make this as smooth as possible, those transitions. And I'm going to darken this down here later because I think that should be richer. So I want those smooth transitions. So I'm opening up the shadows a little bit as well. Now, at this point, I felt like I wanted something richer. And one of the ways to get something richer when you have fog is to use some dehaze. Again, it all depends on what you're going for. And a lot of times I'm not sure exactly what I was going to do, but I know what I want in my mind, or at least I think I have an idea of what I want. So I added some dehaze. And when I add some dehaze here, I'm going to go pretty aggressive here. And see, that's really bringing out more of this richness that I'm talking about. So I'm going to actually take this all the way up right here somewhere. I'll add some clarity, and look at what the clarity does towards the bottom. Again, enhancing the mid-tone contrast, making it more graphic. I'll add a little bit of texture, not too much. We don't really need much texture here because it's just the frame of the building and the glass. So, if anything, I could probably leave this fairly low. Okay, one other thing to keep in mind is that even with a black and white image, the temperature adjustment still has an effect, right? Because you're changing the balance between cool and warm, and the black and white conversion is based on the different colors in the image, right? So you'll notice that if I adjust the temperature here, cooler or warmer, right, it has a little change there. And so I was around here, and if I go up to 57, it just lightens that up very slightly. So it depends on the image. It may have a little slight effect or not. You can experiment with that and see if it makes any kind of change. Not something that it's a major change, but just something to be aware of. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the black and white section, or the B and W section, and this is where we can adjust the tones based on the color in the image. Okay, so that means that if you have a particular color in your image, in your color image, you can adjust the lightness or darkness of it once you convert it to black and white. So as an example, you'll see here that my image is mostly blue. When I come back to the color version, it's mostly blue. So that means that this red slider is not going to do much. This yellow slider is not going to do much. None of these are going to do anything. But when I move the blue slider, that will definitely have an effect, as you can see, because it's raising or lowering the brightness, the luminosity of that color. And so I want to take this up to, I want it to be a little lighter, maybe around 11. I don't think this one has any effect. This one doesn't have any effect. Okay, so that's good. What I want now is, so far I'm happy, but I want, I think I want to make it a little more dramatic. And one way I can try to do that, or I attempted to do that and it worked quite well for me, is come down to the effects and just going to create a vignette on all four sides, just to create a little more sense of moving into the image. And I'm going to pull the vignette down around here like so. And you can see what that does now. It actually pushes your eye into the image and lets the tones kind of grow, the tonality kind of grow into this area. But it doesn't get bright to the edge. It gets a little darker, so it keeps you coming and moving inside the image. And that's the idea. You want to try to have your viewer move throughout the frame, but always feel like they want to stay inside the frame, like they want to return from the edge, maybe over to the other edge or what have you, but they want to stay inside because there's interest. There's something interesting for the eye to follow, for the eye to move through. Okay, that's movement, that's dynamism, that's rhythm, etc. Okay, and then so I'm going to come back to notice that when I added that vignette, all right, my histogram changed a little bit. And all that means is that I'm going to come back and revisit my white and black point again. As I mentioned before, those are never set in stone. I always come back, I may come back and adjust them just to try to get as much luminosity as possible out of my image. And so if I adjust my whites again, notice that now I'm not clipping. Before I was clipping right here. Now I'm not clipping that much anymore. I can actually take it up to here. So maybe something like that. I'll check my blacks, and that's pretty good. In fact, I'm going to raise the shadows a little bit more. And I'm also going to push the highlights up a little bit. Usually we are using the highlights to pull down the highlights. I just want to push them up a little bit, again, just to create some an accent in the highlight area, some sparkle, if you will. That's what I kind of like to think about it, okay? And that's really happening in this area up here. Okay, and last but not least, I think I will come down to the detail panel and apply some sharpening. And really all I really want to sharpen here is these edges. Okay, so we don't need to sharpen the panes of glass, just sharpen the framing of the building, right? this amazing skeleton of the building. Just get that nice and crisp. So for that, I'm going to, you always want to zoom in at 100% when you apply sharpening, because you can see the sharpening effect better. And I think around 50 or 60, that's pretty good. That's no sharpening. The amount, if I raise it up to 132, that's maximum sharpening. That's a bit too much. You can see that it's actually bringing out a little bit of noise there. So I'm going to come back to around 57 or 58. The radius adjustment is for determining how wide your sharpening is going to be on each edge. So if you use a low radius, you get a very thin, fine sharpening for each edge. But I don't have a lot of edges here. This isn't your typical landscape. My edges are very broad. They're very, very specific. As I said, it's just that each of those lines on the building. So I can use a fairly high radius here. And that means that each edge is going to get a wider sharpening, giving me a simpler sharpening, meaning I'm not going to get sharpening in very fine areas like the glass, because there's no need to sharpen the panes of glass there. Whenever you use a high radius, the detail slider really isn't effective, because the detail slider here is when you use a low radius. When you have lots of detail in your image, the detail slider allows you to add more, I would call it micro sharpening. When you're using a high radius, this typically happens with things like buildings, where you don't have a lot of, a micro detail, smooth architecture, portraits, particularly portraits of younger people where their faces are very smooth. You want to use a higher radius, low detail. And then the masking adjustment, one of my favorite tools in Lightroom, allows us to mask off areas of the image that don't need any sharpening. So I'm going to hold down the Option key. You have to keep the Option key depressed for this to work. And then I'm going to press on the masking adjustment and hold my finger down on that as well. And as I move this to the right, you'll see that areas of the image that are smooth turn black or blacker, and that means that they are getting protected from the sharpening. So right around here, you see that the only thing that's getting sharpened in the image is the frame of the building, and everything else is getting less sharpening down at the bottom right, where it's pretty dark. It's not getting any sharpening at all. And that really allows the sharpening to be applied where it needs to be applied, and not applied where it doesn't need to be applied, which generally will make your image, the masking adjustment is a way to give your image more depth, because our eyes move towards areas of sharpness first, and then we perceive things that are softer to be more in the distance, right? So because there's no sharpening up here or in the panes of glass, that creates more separation between them. And again, the idea here is to move the viewer up along these lines, through the buildings, into this fog, and then back down again. And then last but not least, I want to, I think I want to apply a little bit of burning to this part of the building here, just to make this a little bit richer. So I'm going to press K on my keyboard. That's a shortcut for bringing up an adjustment brush to create a mask. I'm going to press K, and you see that right away I get a brush. That's the same as over here clicking on create new mask and then selecting brush. You notice that it says K, so that's the shortcut. And I'm going to make this -20 exposure, so just your traditional or standard burning brush. And I'm going to start with a flow of 100. So flow is the strength of the brush overall, right? And just darken this here like this. And then as I move up here, maybe just to extend that a little bit, I'm going to lower the flow so it's a little bit softer, right? So it's not as rich or dark as it is now. Remember that if I change the exposure, it's going to change what I've already applied. I want to leave what I've applied as it is. I just want to change the strength of this in the new area that I'm going to apply it in now. So I'm going to press 6 on my keyboard. That drops the flow down to 60 or 60% full strength. And just, you see how it's a little bit softer now, not as strong. Something like that. Okay, and just that little darkening there, I'm going to come back up to 100 and just add it down here like that. Okay, and that gives me, I think, just a smoother gradation here. These darks here, the darkest part of the image, it gradates, gets lighter and lighter and lighter. And I love that smooth sort of movement. The smoother it is, the more your eye just kind of glides through it very seamlessly or easily. And that's, for me, what this image is kind of about. It's just, I looked up and my eye just sort of kept going up into the clouds, and it was a very smooth transition, nothing abrupt, very gentle thing. So, all right, so that's it for this image. So there's the before in color, the original, and then the after, the after black and white, which I think is much more graphic, much more dramatic in the graphic nature of it. All right, so are there anybody else have any questions before we wrap up? That's a whole hour gone already. Any questions, anything else on the updates or anything I've done here? Looks like everybody's asked whatever questions you're going to ask. As I mentioned before, these are topics and things that I cover in the Academy all the time. So if you have any interest in that, feel free to drop me an email. I'm happy to discuss it with you in case you have any interest. We have a great group of members, and we are really focused on telling stories, visual stories with our images, and becoming better photographers, particularly in this day and age of AI and generated images. We want to keep the creativity in our work so that we can keep that human element in the work. All right, everyone. If that's it for tonight, then I will let you go. Thanks very much again for joining me. I appreciate it. And see you guys next time, hopefully very soon.